The cafe smelled of fresh coffee and rain that day. Harold was 22, working at the post office and waiting for his order when he saw her for the first time. Margaret was sitting alone by the window, reading a small book, her dark hair tucked behind her ear. She looked up when the doorbell chimed, and for a second, their eyes met. It was one of those quiet, simple moments that somehow stays with a person forever. Harold didn't know it then, but that look would change the rest of his life. He sat down 2 tables away, pretending not to watch her. She was drinking tea and writing something on a napkin, smiling to herself as she did. When she got up to leave, she dropped her scarf. Harold stood, picked it up, and called out, "Miss, you dropped this." She turned, thanked him softly, and smiled. That smile hit him harder than any thunderstorm he'd ever seen. He didn't even get her name, but he knew he'd find her again. And he did. The next Sunday, he saw her at the local market, standing near the flower stall. Gathering every bit of courage he had, Harold walked up and said, "You owe me a tea for that scarf I saved." She laughed, surprised but amused. "Maybe I do," she replied. Her name was Margaret, and from that day, tea became their little tradition. They met every week after that, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes walking in the park, sometimes sitting near the lake where she liked to feed the ducks. Margaret was quiet and thoughtful, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. Harold, on the other hand, was the talker. He told her stories about work, his friends, and his big dreams of owning a small house someday. She listened, smiled, and sometimes teased him when he said something silly. But her eyes always softened when she looked at him. When he finally asked her to marry him, he didn't make it fancy. It was a summer evening. They were walking home after a movie when he stopped near the old bridge and said, "I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" She looked at him, tears glimmering under the streetlight, and said yes, without a second thought. Their wedding was small but beautiful. Just family, close friends, and a lot of laughter. Margaret wore a simple white dress and carried daisies, her favorite flowers. Harold couldn't stop smiling even when the photographer told him to stand still. He didn't care about the pictures. He just wanted to hold her hand. They built a life together slowly, one piece at a time. They bought a small house at the edge of town, painted the walls themselves, and planted roses in the front yard. Harold worked long hours at the post office, while Margaret took up teaching children at the local school. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, drink tea, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes she would hum songs from the radio, and Harold would try to sing along badly. She always laughed when he missed the tune. Their love wasn't dramatic or loud. It was steady, gentle, and full of small moments that built a lifetime. They argued sometimes, like all couples do. Once about a broken plate, another time about Harold forgetting to lock the back door. But their fights never lasted long. Harold would always say something funny to make her laugh, and she'd forgive him before the night ended. They had 2 children, Emily and Robert. Margaret was a wonderful mother, patient and kind. She would read bedtime stories to them every night, and Harold would sneak in with cookies after she turned off the lights. As the kids grew up, the house filled with laughter, noise, and the smell of home-cooked meals. Holidays were loud and joyful, and every year, Harold would look at Margaret across the table and feel lucky all over again. Time moved faster than they realized. The children grew, got married, and moved away. The house became quieter, but never empty. Margaret filled it with love, with her baking, her plants, and her endless care for Harold. Even when his hair turned gray and his back began to ache, she would still call him my handsome man. He'd laugh and say, "You need your eyes checked." Dear, one thing about Margaret always stayed the same, the small box in her dresser. Harold noticed it when they first got married. It was wooden, old, and always locked. Once, when he asked what was inside, she smiled softly and said, "Just old memories. Nothing important." He trusted her completely, so he never asked again. It became part of their quiet life, a mystery that didn't need solving. Years passed. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by family. Their children gave speeches about their love, their grandchildren handed them flowers, and Harold looked at Margaret with the same adoration he had the day he met her. She smiled back, her eyes shining with warmth. No one could imagine that behind that smile she carried something heavy in her heart, something she had never spoken of. Even in their 60s and 70s, they still kept their old habits. Sunday morning tea, walks in the park, evening talks under the porch light. Sometimes Harold would catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, holding an old photo album. He'd ask what she was thinking about, and she'd say, "Oh, just remembering." He didn't push her. He knew everyone had their own quiet memories. When she started forgetting small things, names, dates, where she put her glasses, Harold took care of her gently. He'd help her dress, cook her favorite meals, and sit beside her during her afternoon naps. He often whispered, "You took care of me all these years? It's my turn now." She would smile weakly and squeeze his hand. Their love, even after 60 years, still felt soft and familiar, like the sound of rain on their roof. But sometimes, when the night was quiet, Margaret would look at him and whisper, "You've been good to me." Harold, he'd answer, "You make it easy. Love." Yet her eyes would glimmer with something unspoken, a sadness he couldn't understand. He thought it was just age, maybe fear of the end. He didn't know that behind that gentle smile was a secret she had kept hidden her entire life. A secret that, after 60 years together, would one day break his heart and yet make him love her even more. Their story, for all its simplicity, was built on decades of love, laughter, and unspoken truths. Harold believed he knew everything about Margaret. He had shared every day, every joy, every tear with her. He didn't realize that sometimes even the closest hearts carry memories too painful to share, memories that sleep quietly until time decides to reveal them. The years rolled by quietly, like gentle waves. Harold and Margaret had grown old together in that same little house filled with laughter and memories. Their garden was still full of blooming roses, though Harold's knees hurt when he bent to water them. Margaret loved to sit on the porch, wrapped in her warm shawl, watching the sun go down behind the hills. Life had slowed down, but it still had warmth in it, the warmth that only 60 years of love can build. But time was changing things in small, painful ways. Margaret had started forgetting things. At first, it was harmless. She'd misplace her reading glasses or forget where she'd kept the sugar jar. Harold would tease her, saying, "You're hiding things from yourself again, love," and she'd laugh, brushing it off. But slowly, the forgetfulness grew heavier. Some mornings, she would wake up confused, looking around the room as if it were strange to her. Once, she called Harold by her brother's name. He smiled, trying to make it light, but inside something twisted in his chest. He took care of her as best as he could. He learned how to cook her favorite soup, helped her brush her hair, and reminded her gently when she forgot to eat. Sometimes she would just sit quietly, staring out the window. When he asked what she was thinking, she'd reply softly, "Oh, just lost in old times." Her voice would tremble a little, and he'd reach out to hold her hand. That simple touch always brought her back to the present. Their children visited often, bringing laughter into the house. Emily would cook dinner and scold her father for not getting enough rest. Robert would help fix the broken fence or mow the lawn. They both noticed how fragile their mother had become, but none of them wanted to talk about it. Everyone was pretending that everything was fine, that life would go on as always. Margaret would smile for their sake, sitting among them, her eyes sometimes distant, as if she was hearing voices from a different time. One evening, as rain softly hit the windows, Harold was reading the newspaper when Margaret spoke suddenly. "Harold," she said, her voice quiet but steady. He looked up, expecting her to ask about tea or the weather. But she continued, "Do you ever regret anything?" The question caught him off guard. "Regret?" he repeated, folding the paper. "Not one thing, love. We've had a good life." She nodded, her eyes on the floor. "That's good. I wish I could say the same." Her words struck him like a whisper of thunder. He asked gently, "What do you mean?" But she just smiled sadly, shook her head and said, "Oh, it's nothing. Just old thoughts." And she changed the subject, asking if he wanted more tea. Harold didn't push her, but that night he couldn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in his mind. What could she possibly regret? He went over every memory. Their wedding, their children, their home. trying to find what she might mean. But nothing made sense. Margaret had always been happy, or at least she had always seemed happy. In the following weeks, he noticed her growing quieter. She started spending more time in their bedroom, sometimes humming to herself while holding something small in her hands. When he asked what it was, she quickly slipped it into the drawer. "Just a keepsake," she said with a smile. Harold didn't ask again, though a small unease settled in his heart. Their daily life continued, filled with little moments of love and care. Every morning, Harold would help her put on her sweater and walk her to the porch so she could sit in the sun. They would drink tea together, talking about the neighbors or the flowers. Sometimes she'd forget what day it was, and he'd joke, "It's the same as yesterday. Wonderful, because I'm still stuck with you." She'd laugh softly and call him a fool. But her health kept fading. The doctor told Harold it was early-stage dementia. He listened quietly, his hands clenched together, feeling a cold fear creeping inside him. When he came home, he didn't tell Margaret the full truth. He didn't want to see her worry. Instead, he promised himself that he would take care of her, no matter what. He started keeping notes around the house, labels on drawers, small reminders written in big letters like "teacups here" or "keys on the table." Sometimes she read them, sometimes she ignored them. But even on her worst days, when she forgot what year it was, she never forgot Harold. She always recognized his face. She would look at him, her eyes soft, and whisper, "You've always been here for me." One evening after dinner, she sat beside him and said quietly, "Do you think love can survive mistakes?" Harold looked at her, puzzled. "What kind of mistakes?" he asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached out, took his hand and said, "You have a good heart, Harold. You always did." Then she leaned her head on his shoulder and fell asleep. The next morning, she didn't remember the conversation. When he brought it up gently, she only smiled, as if it had never happened. Harold started to wonder if her mind was drifting somewhere far away into a past he didn't know about. But he told himself not to worry after all. 60 years was a long time. Everyone had memories they didn't talk about. Their anniversary came again that year. Harold bought her daisies, her favorite flowers, and she smiled when she saw them. "You still remember?" she said, holding the bouquet close. "Of course," he said softly. "How could I forget the best day of my life?" They spent the evening together, sitting in the garden, hand in hand. The air was filled with the smell of rain and blooming roses. When the stars came out, Margaret looked up at the sky and whispered, "Do you think they remember us up there?" Harold chuckled. "Who?" She smiled faintly. "Old souls. People we once loved." He didn't understand. But he squeezed her hand and said, "If they ever met you, they'd never forget." That night, as Harold tucked her into bed, she held his hand tightly. "You've been good to me," she said again, her voice weak. "I'm sorry for the things I never said." He brushed her hair back and whispered, "There's nothing to be sorry for." "You're my heart, Margaret." She smiled through tears, whispering, "You're kind. Too kind." After she fell asleep, Harold sat by her bedside for a long time, listening to her soft breathing. He felt a strange ache in his chest, a feeling that something was slipping away. It's not just her health, but something deeper, something she'd kept hidden for years. He looked around their room, the photographs, the books, the familiar furniture, everything they had shared for decades, and then his eyes landed on the small wooden box on her dresser, the one she'd kept locked since the day they married. For the first time in years, he felt drawn to it. He stood, walked over quietly, and touched it. It was cool under his fingers, smooth and old. The little lock still hung on it, unchanged. He thought about opening it, just for a second, but stopped. No, he couldn't. It was hers. He turned off the lamp, climbed into bed, and whispered good night, love. But even as he closed his eyes, Margaret's earlier words echoed in his mind. I wish I could say the same. He didn't know what she meant yet, or how deeply those words would one day break his heart. The morning light came through the curtains, soft and quiet. The house felt too still. For the first time in 60 years, Harold woke up to silence. Margaret wasn't there beside him. The bed was cold. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep the night before, her hand still resting on his. He had sat there for hours, holding it, not wanting to let go. Now the air around him felt heavy and hollow. The home that once sang with laughter and teacups now felt like a museum of memories. Days passed in a blur. The funeral was small, just family and a few close friends. People came to him, said kind words, and told stories about what a wonderful woman Margaret had been. He nodded, smiled weakly, and thanked them. But when the house emptied, the loneliness hit him like a wave. Every room smelled like her perfume. Her shawl was still draped over the chair. Her slippers still sat beside the bed. Harold couldn't bring himself to move anything. He would sit in her rocking chair, talking to her softly, as if she could still hear him. He started going through her things slowly, one box at a time. It wasn't easy. Each drawer held a piece of her life, old photographs, recipe cards with her handwriting, faded birthday cards from their children. Every item carried a memory that made him smile and ache at the same time. But then one afternoon, as he was folding her clothes, he noticed something familiar sitting in the corner of the dresser, the small wooden box. It was exactly where it had always been, untouched, locked for 60 years. Harold had seen that box and never once opened it. He picked it up now, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The wood was worn smooth, the color a little faded. His heart began to beat faster. He remembered the way she always brushed off his questions about it. Just old memories, she used to say. Now, standing there alone, the words echoed in his mind. Old memories. He wanted to know what they were. Maybe it was time. Maybe she would want him to know now. As he turned the box in his hands, something slipped out from underneath, a small silver key attached to a thin chain. He recognized it immediately. It was the key she always wore around her neck. He had assumed it was just jewelry, something sentimental. But now he understood. It was the key to this box. His hands trembled as he sat down on the edge of the bed, the box on his lap. For a long while he just stared at it, unsure if he should open it. A part of him was afraid of what he might find, afraid that it could change how he saw her. But another part of him needed to know. He took a deep breath, inserted the key, and turned it gently. The lock clicked open with a soft sound that felt far too loud in the quiet room. Inside, the box was neatly arranged. There were old letters tied with a ribbon, black and white photographs, and something small wrapped in a handkerchief. Harold picked up the bundle first and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was an old ring, silver worn, but still shining faintly. It wasn't his. His wedding ring to her was gold, plain and simple. This one was delicate, engraved with tiny initials, T+M. His heart skipped. T, he frowned, confused, and set the ring aside. Then he picked up the letters. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded with time. The top one was addressed to my dearest Margaret, written in neat handwriting he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then unfolded it slowly. The words on the page were filled with tenderness and longing. My dearest Margaret, I dream of the day I can hold you again. The war has taken so much, but thinking of you keeps me alive. You are the light I carry through every dark night. Harold froze. The war. The letter was dated 1944, before he had even met her. He read on, each word sinking deeper. The writer's name at the bottom was Thomas. The name made Harold's stomach tighten. He had never heard of any Thomas in her stories. There were more letters, dozens of them, each one more heartfelt than the last. They spoke of plans to marry, of dreams of a small home, of children, of growing old together. Margaret had saved every single one of them. As Harold read, he began to piece together the story. Thomas was a soldier, a man she had loved deeply before the war took him away. The letters spoke of promises and hope, of a future that never came to be. In the final letter, Thomas wrote that he was being sent on a dangerous mission. He ended it with, "If fate is kind, I will return to you. Wait for me, my love. Always, Thomas." Harold's eyes blurred with tears. He felt his heart ache, not with jealousy, but with sorrow. She had carried this part of her past quietly, never letting him see the shadow behind her smile. He understood now why she kept that box hidden. It was a piece of her heart that belonged to another lifetime. He thought that was all, but when he looked deeper into the box, he found something else. One letter that didn't match the others. It was newer, the paper less aged. The date on it made him pause. It was written in 1961, a year after he and Margaret had gotten married. His hands shook as he opened it. "My dearest Margaret, I don't know if this letter will reach you. I've finally returned home, but everything is different. They told me you've married. I can't blame you. I was lost too long. I only wanted to see you once more, to tell you I'm alive. But I won't disturb the life you've built. You deserve peace, and the man you chose must love you dearly. Keep this ring, if you can. Think of it not as a promise broken, but as a memory of love that survived even war." Thomas Harold sat still, the letter trembling in his hands. Thomas had lived, Margaret had known, and yet she had chosen silence. She never told him. She had kept this secret buried in that small box all these years. He felt an ache so deep, it almost hurt to breathe. He imagined her, young and heartbroken, learning that the man she once loved had survived, but she was already someone's wife. He could picture her crying alone, holding that letter, unable to tell anyone. Harold set the papers down carefully and closed the box. He stared at it for a long time, his thoughts tangled between sorrow and understanding. She had loved him, of that he was sure. The 60 years they shared were full of real love. But part of her heart had once belonged to someone else. She had carried that memory quietly, like a ghost she couldn't let go of. He wiped his eyes and looked at the ring again, its silver glint catching the light. Instead of anger, he felt only compassion. Life had been cruel to her once, but she had chosen to live, to build a new happiness with him. That night, Harold sat in the living room, the box beside him. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. He whispered softly, as if she could hear him from wherever she was. "You could have told me, Maggie. I'd have understood." The only reply was the rustle of the wind against the windows, gentle and kind, as if the world itself was comforting him. Harold didn't sleep that night. The letter from Thomas lay on the table beside him, the edges curled and yellowed. The words swirled in his mind again and again. He could almost hear the voice of the man who had written them, gentle, full of love and full of loss. Every sentence felt like a whisper from a past that had lived right beside his own life without him ever knowing. The house around him felt different now, like the walls were holding secrets too. He kept thinking about Margaret, about all those times she smiled when he caught her lost in thought. All those moments, she said, just old memories. Dow! He knew what memories she meant. The next morning he sat at the kitchen table with his tea untouched. The light outside was soft, spilling through the window like a quiet memory. On the table, the box sat open. The ring, the letters, the photographs, they all looked so fragile, like the dust of another world. He picked up one of the photographs and looked closely. Margaret was there, young and beautiful, her hair tied back with a ribbon. Beside her was a tall man in uniform, Thomas. They were standing in front of a field, holding hands and smiling at each other like two people who believed the world would never change. Harold felt his throat tighten. He had never seen her look that young and alive, so full of hope. He placed the photograph down gently, afraid it might crumble under his fingers. Then he looked at the last letter again, the one Thomas had written after she was already married. Every word carried so much pain, but also something pure. Thomas hadn't blamed her. He hadn't tried to take her back. He had only wanted her to know he was alive, that he still cared. He had wanted her to be happy. Harold sat back and closed his eyes. For the first time, he saw Margaret not as his wife of 60 years, but as a young woman, a woman who had once loved another man, lost him to war, and then built a new life while carrying the shadow of that love in her heart. He realized how much courage it must have taken for her to keep going, to smile, to open her heart again after such pain. He thought about their first meeting in the cafe, the way she had smiled at him, soft but distant, like someone who had known sorrow and still chose kindness. He understood now that smile had carried a story he hadn't known. He spent the next few days in silence, sorting through the letters one by one. Some were full of passion, others of simple, tender words. "Your eyes, one letter said, "are the color of calm days. I want to see them again," another said. "When this war ends, I'll build you a home by the river. You'll grow daisies in the garden." Harold stopped at that line. Daisies, Margaret's favorite flower. She had planted them every spring in their garden, never missing a year. He used to tease her, asking why she loved them so much when there were so many prettier flowers. She'd always smile and say, "They remind me of something good." Now he knew what she meant. Each discovery hit him with a mix of sadness and strange tenderness. It hurt, but not in a bitter way. It was the kind of hurt that comes from understanding someone more deeply than before. He realized that Margaret hadn't hidden the past to deceive him. She had hidden it because she didn't want to hurt him. She wanted to protect what they had built together. Still, a question lingered. Had she ever thought of Thomas while lying beside him? Had she ever missed him on those quiet nights when she held Harold's hand and said, "You've been good to me"? He didn't know, and maybe he didn't need to. Love, he realized, wasn't always simple or clean. Sometimes it carried scars, and that didn't make it less true. He took the letters outside one evening and sat under the old oak tree where he and Margaret used to sit every summer evening. The air was cool, and the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. He opened one of the letters again and began to read it aloud, his voice soft and shaky. "My dearest Margaret, every day without you feels like a dream I can't wake from. When this is over, I'll come back to you. I'll find you, no matter how long it takes." Harold stopped reading, tears filling his eyes. "You did find her," he whispered. "Just too late." He folded the letter carefully and pressed it to his chest. And she found happiness too. Maybe not the one she dreamed of, but real all the same. He stayed there until the stars began to appear. When he finally went back inside, he knew what he needed to do. He gathered the letters, the ring, and the photographs, and placed them neatly back in the box. He closed the lid gently and locked it again. Then he took Margaret's photo, the one of her laughing in the garden, and set it on top. "I know now, Maggie," he said softly. "You carried this pain so I wouldn't have to. You were stronger than I ever realized."
Ow!
That night, as he sat alone in their bedroom, he felt closer to her than he had in days. Her absence still hurt, but it no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like she was still there, in every memory, every heartbeat, every breath he took. Over the next few weeks, Harold started to see their life together differently. The small things, her favorite teacup, the songs she hummed while cleaning, the way she looked out the window before sunset, all felt like pieces of her story that made sense now. Even her silence about the past wasn't a wall. It was an act of love. She had given him her years, her laughter, her care. She had chosen to live fully with him, even while carrying a hidden ache inside her heart. One afternoon, Harold visited the cemetery where she was buried. He brought fresh daisies, just like she loved. He placed them beside her stone and sat down beside it. "You had a whole other life before me," he said softly, "and you carried it alone. I wish I'd known. I wish I could have shared that weight with you." He sat there quietly for a while, feeling the breeze move gently through the trees. The air was cool, and for a moment he thought he could almost hear her voice. It's gentle and warm, saying, "I didn't want you to carry my sadness. You gave me peace, Harold." That was enough. Closed his eyes, letting the feeling wash over him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even heartbroken anymore. He just felt grateful. Grateful that she had loved him enough to build a life, full of happiness even while a part of her still belonged to someone else. That night, Harold sat on the porch, looking up at the stars. He whispered, "I forgive you, Maggie, and thank you for loving me, for choosing me, for staying." The wind rustled through the trees, and he smiled faintly. He didn't need to understand everything. Sometimes love wasn't about knowing every secret, it was about accepting the whole of a person, even the parts that stayed silent. Harold sat in the quiet house that now felt too big, too empty. The ticking of the old wall clock was the only sound that broke the silence. It had been 2 days since he opened Margaret's box. 2 days since he read every letter that changed everything he thought he knew about the woman he had loved for 60 years. He sat on the couch, the letters neatly stacked beside him, and looked at the photo of them on their wedding day. Margaret looked beautiful, smiling shyly at the camera. Her eyes sparkled with joy. But now, Harold wondered what she was thinking that day. Was she thinking of him or of Thomas? The thought brought a painful ache to his heart, but behind that pain was something else understanding. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He remembered her laughter, the way she hummed softly while cooking, how she always made him tea exactly the way he liked. Those things were real. Those moments were real. Nothing could change that. Maybe her heart had been broken before she met him. Maybe she had carried a wound he never saw, but she had still chosen to build a life with him. She had chosen to stay, to love, and to share her days with him. That meant something far deeper than any secret from her past. The next morning, Harold decided to visit their favorite spot, the old oak tree behind their house. It was where they had spent countless evenings watching sunsets together, where she used to rest her head on his shoulder as the world went quiet. He took the small box with him, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. The air was cool, and the ground was covered in fallen leaves that crunched under his shoes. The smell of autumn filled the air, sharp and sweet. When he reached the tree, he sat down slowly, his knees aching from age, and placed the box on the ground beside him. He opened the lid once more. The letters were there, the photos, and the old engagement ring that wasn't his. He looked at them one last time. He thought about Thomas, the young man who wrote those letters, who had once dreamed of a life with Margaret. Somewhere in another world, that man had lost her, just as Harold had now. There was no anger left in him, only a strange kind of peace. Life had played its cruel tricks, but in the end, love had endured. Margaret had never left Harold's side. Even when her mind began to fade, she remembered him. She always asked for him. That had to mean something. He took out the ring and turned it over in his fingers. The metal was worn, but still bright in the sunlight. For a long moment, he stared at it, feeling both the weight of it and the lightness that came with forgiveness. He whispered softly, "You carried this alone all your life, didn't you?" His voice cracked a little, and his eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to. You could have told me," but deep down he knew why she hadn't. She had wanted to protect him. She had wanted their love to remain simple, unbroken by the past. Harold began to dig a small hole beneath the oak tree with an old garden trowel. Each motion was slow and careful, almost ritual-like. When the hole was deep enough, he placed the box inside, still open, so the sunlight touched the letters one last time. He looked down and whispered, "Goodbye, my love. I forgive you, and I thank you for choosing me." Then he covered the box with soil, patting it down gently, as if tucking her secret safely into the earth. For a moment he stayed still, his hands resting on the ground. The wind rustled the leaves above him, and it felt almost like she was there, smiling down from somewhere unseen. As he sat there, memories began to flow through him of their first dance, of the children's laughter echoing through the house, of the nights they stayed up talking until dawn. He realized that love wasn't perfect, and it never had to be. It was messy, fragile, and sometimes painful. But it was also beautiful, loyal, and strong. Margaret's secret didn't erase their years together. If anything, it made their love more human, more real. She had carried pain, but she had never stopped loving him. That was the kind of love that lasted a lifetime. In the following weeks, Harold found himself talking to her picture more often. He told her about his day, about how the garden was still blooming and how the grandchildren had visited. It made him feel like she was still there, listening. Sometimes he even caught himself smiling when he passed by the dresser where the box used to sit. The space looked empty now, but in his heart, it felt full. The secret no longer haunted him. It connected him to her in a way he had never felt before. He realized that every person carries a past, and sometimes love means accepting even the parts you never got to see. One evening, as the sun began to set, he went back to the oak tree again. He brought 2 cups of tea, one for himself and one for her, just as they used to do. He sat there in silence, the golden light wrapping everything in warmth. The world seemed softer somehow, as if time itself had slowed down to honor their story. "You know," he said quietly, "we did all right, didn't we?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe you had another love once, but I think, in the end, you were mine." and I was yours." Tears filled his eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow this time. They were of gratitude. For 60 years, they had shared a life filled with love, laughter, and even secrets. But love, he realized, wasn't about knowing everything. It was about staying, forgiving, and holding on. Margaret had done all that. She had stayed. And so would he until his time came to join her again. The wind grew colder, and Harold wrapped his scarf tighter around his neck. He finished his tea, then placed the empty cup beside the tree. As he stood to leave, he looked up at the sky, glowing with shades of orange and pink. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "I'll see you soon." And for the first time in months, as he walked back toward the house, he didn't feel alone. He felt as though she was walking beside him, her hand in his, just as she had for all those years. The secret no longer mattered. What mattered was the life they had built together, a love that even time, loss, or truth could never take away.